Welcome to Conversations. This is your host, Michael Stone, and I'm thrilled to have Richard Strozzi-Heckler. He's an amazing person. We're going to talk about embodied leadership today, and he's the founder and co-director of methodology at Strozzi Institute. He spent over 4 decades researching, developing, and teaching Somatics to business leaders, executive managers, teams from Fortune 500 companies, NGOs, technology startups, nonprofits, the US government, and the military. And he was named one of the top 50 executive coaches in the art and practice of leadership coaching in Profiles in Coaching. He's also a black belt and is the co-founder of the Mideast Aikido project. Welcome to Conversations, Richard.
Good to see you, Michael.
Good to see you.
Thanks
too.
for the invite.
So let's just start out, talk a little bit about the Strozzi Institute that's been around for how many years have you been? 30 years now or something?
Yes, over 35 years.
35, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I moved from doing a body-oriented psychotherapy practice and realizing that this notion of somatics, which is very, very powerful for every individual, could be a very added value to leaders. Leaders of all types, so leaders like how we lead our own life and those leaders who have followers. And so over the years with our research and our practices, we've developed a very strong curriculum where leaders of all sorts work with us.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about what, people often don't think of embodiment. I mean, I worked over 30 years in the corporate world, and I used to say I work with heads on sticks. The only reason they have bodies is to carry their head from meeting to meeting. So why is it important for leaders to be in their body?
Well, let me start off by saying that one of the reasons that we can so easily pollute our waters and poison our air is because we're out of touch with our bodies. I would submit that one of the reasons that most conflict these days very easily precipitates into violence is that we're out of touch with our bodies. And one of the reasons that there's this growing gap between those that have and those that don't have is because we're out of touch with our bodies. And when I say body, what I'm really referring to is this capacity to feel or sense. And it's not like, I'm not saying I'm having a feeling or I'm having an emotion, although that will come up, but we're in touch with this animating principle, which different cultures would call ki or chi, prana, elan vital, and we call energy. And really it is 3.7 billion years of intelligence that is animating us right now. And that probably starting 600 years ago with Descartes and the advent of rationalism, which was a very powerful form. And it's given us transportation, it's given us engineering, medicine, etc., is that we've also pruned out this other part of ourselves. And so we have leaders that can think clearly, can analyze, can make logical conclusions, which are all good and can continue, but they have lost touch with empathy, intuition, that gut feeling, that sense of interdependence and interconnectedness. And our claim is, and it is proven by close to 40 years of work, is that by starting to bring in the life of the body, these other elements can come forward.
Well, I definitely want to talk about your book, Leadership Dojo, Build Your Foundation as an Exemplary Leader. And in that, you ask 3 questions. You ask, what does a leader do? What are the character values most essential to exemplary leadership? And how do you teach these virtues? So I'd love to start out, Richard, with talking about those 3 questions. They're very essential questions.
You know, Michael, many years ago, working in organizations, I was working with a very large telecommunications organization in the United States, and that I started to ask them, and then following organizations too, and I would say, what makes a good leader? And basically everybody said the same thing. You know, they're accountable, they're integrous, they're honest, they're authentic. And these things that, and every company that I went to said the same thing. And as you know, these values go back to like the Bhagavad Gita in India, or they go back to the Bible, or they go back to the Abhidharma in Buddhist psychology. In other words, everybody can agree that not only is this what a good leader is, this is what we're looking for as a citizen too. And then I asked the question of, if all of these things are there, is that how do they become there? What happens? And people mostly would fall into kind of these cliches. Well, you either have it or you don't have it, or you're born with it or you're not born with it. And so there was really this consensus over time that these values really can't be trained. They can be spoken of. They can be spoken about the distinctions of them. You can have definitions of them, but they aren't embodied, which means they're not living in that person. Mm-hmm. And that the idea for most people was that, and we really can't, we don't know how to train it, and we really can't train it. So we just try to see who those best people are. Mm-hmm. And from the Institute's point of view is that we can train those qualities in ourselves. And the training of those qualities in ourselves means that we need to take on specific practices. We need to feel them in our body. We need to work them through our body so they become part of who we are. And I'll take a moment here to tell you something that happened to me many years ago. You know, a lot of my background is in the martial arts. Yeah. I teach and still train Aikido. I'm what's called the 7th Dan, 7th degree black belt. And I was in Japan studying, and that at the end of the day, the European community would come together, and it was basically all males at that time, and everybody talked what they did and what they learned, and there was a lot of testosterone flowing freely. And there was this other young man, and he was from New Guinea, but he had been studying in Oxford, and he was there too. And as everybody was kind of flexing and puffing up their chest, he said, in our country, we have a proverb that goes like this: knowledge is only a rumor until it's in the muscle. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, give me 20 years to chew on that. Knowledge is only a rumor until it's in the muscle. So I think everybody knows that through their recreational sports, they're playing tennis or golf, or they're skiing, water skiing, whatever they're doing, that they'll get better if they're practice. What we know is that leaders can embody these virtues through their practices. Mm-hmm.
And so when you're talking about an embodied self, you're talking about bringing those virtues in. Before you do that, you have to be present. And there's such a epidemic of distraction. And as a leader, I know, you're getting hit from every side, from the computer, from the employees, from the customers, trying to keep it all together. I'm just noticing what I'm doing with my hands as because it feels like that. And talk about that becoming present in the body, and how we begin to do that.
We in our work, we start with a distinction we call being centered. Mm-hmm. We can say that's maybe appropriated from the martial arts or other certain practices. But essentially that means that you're present to the environment and you're present to people around you. You're open to possibilities. You're just not trying to drive your agenda or walking down a narrow lane, but you're open to what life is offering to you and seeing the possibilities of inventing and innovating. And also you're connected to your values. You're connected to your body in that way. So this notion of centering, what I just said, people have it like a magnet on their refrigerator. or a bumper sticker on their car.
Right.
In other words, that's a terrific idea. But if you don't actually embody those principles and you don't live them, then it just stays as an idea. So we have practices so people can then become present, open, and connected. And then, as you say, you're in the marketplace and everything is beginning to merge on you, make requests of you, pull you this way and that way. You start to fragment. If you're practiced enough in the centering practice, you'll come back to being present and recognize what is the right move to make at the right time. Now, over and over again, I've used this word practice, and it's critical to our work, because we know, and it's been proved by the technology of neuroscience, that we change or transform through our practices. Aristotle said, we are what we practice. You know, the old joke, the tourist comes to New York and they say, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And they say, practice. So that we have practices of centering, so that if you do those enough, which means 3,000 repetitions, science tells us, minimally 3,000 repetition brings embodiment. 300 repetitions means like a body memory. So if you remember yourself driving a car and you go, oh, brake, you go to your mind first and then you put on the brake. You do that 3,000 repetitions, then you drive, you listen to music, you're talking on the phone, you're telling the kids to be quiet, and you can still put on the brake.
So in the book, The Leadership Dojo, you talk about different types of leadership practices. So I think people understand sports practices and other kinds of practices, but leadership practices, you're trying to create things that are a little bit ephemeral that you talked about, you know, the integrity and the, you know, trust, you know, those kinds of things. What are those leadership practices that you say we should be learning as leaders? And by the way, you've also said that we're all leaders, and so I'm saying everyone who's listening to this.
Yes. You know, and we bring our programs into schools as well as all the organizations that you mentioned in my my bio. Let me back up a little bit and say this. When we work with leaders, we say that a leader can be seen in basically three different buckets. One is, do they have the competency in their domain or their vector, whether it's engineering or it's accounting or it's financial analysis or it's strategy, etc. Number two is, do they have the commitment and the intelligence to do that? And they need that. The third piece is where we work, is who is this leader? What is the self of this leader? Mm-hmm. And what we say there is that is one of our fundamental powers as individuals and those of us in leadership positions. And that where our work begins to move away from mainstream is we say that the body, or the soma, is intimately linked with the self. So the self and the body actually become one thing. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example here, is that one of the things we say that exemplary leaders do is they manage their mood and they manage the mood of the people that follow them. You can think of mood as a way of being. You can think of it as a spree. You can think of it as a self that can hold and contain multitude of contradictions. And that when anxiety is one of the most infectious moods. So if the leader is in a mood of anxiety, it gets spread. Also, so in the centering practices, we practice of how do you create a mood in yourself so that you're inwardly quiet and settled and you're outwardly prepared for skillful action. Mm-hmm. And centering is a big piece of that. A sense of facing into what really has to be done is a piece of that. So one of the things that we do in our work is that we have varying degrees in which people get thrown off center, or they talk how they get thrown off center, which we call being grabbed. And then immediately they do the practice of coming back to center with the narrative of, I'm coming back to center for the sake of fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Number two, this notion about mood, Michael, is that we build practices so the listener, so the leader begins to cultivate the virtue of listening deeply to others. And we know again now, which we've known for millennium, but we know now because of the technology and neuroscience, is that when somebody feels listened to, or acknowledged, or seen, it releases a whole new set of hormones that create a feeling of well-being. Just being seen. I don't mean that we put on a happy face for somebody or we're always affirming somebody, but from an authentic voice and an authentic presence, we acknowledge the other. That stimulates them in a way and mobilizes them in a way to make more contact, to be more productive, to do good in the world while they're in a state of well-being. So that those two things, let's say, how do you create a mood?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people will say, oh, right, you're changing something in your mind. You put on a happy face. Nina Bull at Columbia University did a whole bunch of research on mood, attitude, and her claim, which is ours, is that it's a bodily phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, Albert Mehrabian, Professor Emeritus at UCLA, has done a longitudinal study, and he says, what makes people credible? In other words, why would we trust somebody?
Yeah.
And the research has shown over varied demographics, gender, class, race, ethnicity, different nations and languages, that people listen actually 7% content and 93% presence, comportment, rhythm of voice, deportment. So that's an incredible statistic.
Yeah.
And so it's that part of us that when we're with somebody and we're always navigating for trust and am I connected here, that we actually are reading another person's presence.
Mm-hmm.
So in an authentic way, not just like tips and techniques, but that coming from the inside out, we have practices in which the leader then can build a living, embodied presence, which others find credible and want to move with.
Brilliant. I love that. One of the things you said just a minute ago was how a leader manages their mood and they manage others' mood. And I'm just listening to how people might be listening to that to think that there's something that I need to do to manage another, kind of a hierarchical leader-follower model, which is not what you're talking about. So I'm really interested in one of the things you talk about in the Leadership Dojo is just alone facial expressions and the studies that have been done of how that impacts the mood of everyone around you. Can you speak to that a little bit, and also to this leadership model that's always been leader follower? If you say everybody's a leader, then that kind of questions, oh, is there a leader follower model?
Yeah, yes. Let me start by saying thank you for catching that, because when we say manages other people's moods, it's not like we're going to try to control the space. Right. But basically that if I'm in a place where I'm present, I'm open to possibilities, I'm really connected to my principles, can that radiate out and allow the whole team to be like that, or the whole unit, or the whole division? And that really what we're working with is not just individual leaders, but building a leadership culture. Mm-hmm. So that means that it's less hierarchical and that everybody can assess or voice their opinion on an equal playing field with the other, so all boats will rise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. the Professor Ekman at UCSF has done a lot of work on, Paul Ekman has done a lot of work on why do we trust people? Can we trust people? Can we see that they're lying? And he did this research, which was fantastic, where he took a picture of somebody that was angry and he showed it to somebody on the streets of London, say, what's happening with this person? And they said, oh, they're angry. And then they would take it to the highlands of Thailand or New Guinea or someplace, a subsistence economy, and say, what do you see in this person? They would say, oh, they're angry. So the notion, what Darwin put out, that these are really universal emotions in human beings, and then it can be perceived. Mm-hmm. And then he went through a study of saying, let's look at anger. And when somebody's angry, these are the facial muscles that begin to come into play. Mm-hmm. And all day, him and his research team, maybe let's say a dozen, they did this many times, they would practice doing that, and they'd go, oh, this is a zygomatic, or this is the malar bone, or this is how we furrow our forehead. And at the end of the day, guess what they all felt? They felt angry. Mm. So the notion of how we shape ourselves can produce an emotion, which is extraordinary. Yeah. And they did say the same thing for let's practice joy. At the end of the day, everybody felt joyful. Mm-hmm. That's not to say put on just a happy face, but it's really to be aware of the way that we organize or shape ourselves is very intimately linked with how we take skillful action, our moods, our emotions, how we listen to others. So that, as you said in the beginning, it's just not one talking head talking to another talking head. Mm. That the whole nervous system, the whole spirit, if you will, is engaged. Mm. To your other question, we hold that the era of hierarchical leadership is something much more in the past now. Mm-hmm. That what's really required is that we have a leadership culture. And so that people live in a network of conversations and a network of relationships. And in that network of commitments to each other, that they go, here is the forsake of what we're doing, this action. This is what we want to produce. This is the world we're trying to create. And then we move forward with this way. Not just one single leader declaring what that future is.
Yeah. And I just want to say to my listeners, especially if you just tuned in, you might be listening to this thinking, oh, well, I'm not a leader in an organization or something like that. But these skills apply to everyone at any particular time in your life. You're a leader as a parent. You're a leader in many different places in your life. And there's an opportunity to really make a difference in people's lives by adapting and looking at these embodiment skills. And one of the things, Richard, that people often say is, well, leaders are born. You're either born a leader or you're not a leader. And you're saying quite to the contrary. No, you can not only learn to be a leader from the head, but you learn to be a leader by shaping yourself. Now, that's an interesting comment. How do we learn to shape ourselves to be a leader? Can you give some examples on how that works?
The first thing that we need to do is to build awareness of the self, is to know thyself. Mm-hmm. So again, this is a new concept. This goes back to the Chinese Tao Te Ching. It goes back to Aristotle. It goes back to Sun Tzu in The Art of War, which says the first principle is to know thyself. Mm-hmm. So we know that the more we are aware of about how we're acting, how we're interacting, how we're moving through the world, increases our choice. Choice follows awareness. What we do is we bring our awareness to the life of the body. How are we holding our shoulders? How are we looking with our eyes? How do we move and interact with other people and groups of people?
How do we breathe?
How we breathe,
yeah.
Absolutely, yes. Fundamental. So for example, there's that person, and just for those of you who are just listening, my shoulders are up to my ears. like this. And if I said to somebody, I'm an expert on relaxation, I've written 10 books on relaxation, and I can inform you about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what you're listening to are two things. One is what's coming out of my mouth and how I'm shaping myself. The shaping of bringing my shoulders up to my ears. Now, fundamentally is that one of the signs of fear is when our shoulders will go up. That's, I'm going to protect my jugular vein. Very, very deep in us. So if we live in a low grade state or chronic sense of fear, our shoulders may just slightly rise up. They rise up. And if somebody says, hey, how are you today? And you go, I'm doing great. And those that are just listening, I have my shoulders up to my ears again. You'd go, oh, they say they're doing great, but you don't look great. And that's what I mean, that the first thing we need to do is going, how are we now in our breath patterns?
Mm-hmm.
How are we organizing around our muscular system? So, for example, we know the system is designed that the teeth never have to touch. And there's some people under stress or duress, they'll start to gnash on their teeth, their jaw muscles ripple. And what they're doing is they're going against the natural order of things. And that action is telling them or telling their partner that they're under duress.
Mm-hmm. So we're looking for congruency or coherence when we're looking, even if we don't know we're doing that, we automatically are just from our bringing in people, unless we're so unconscious that we don't even recognize anything's going on over there.
Yes, that congruence is just really, really essential. So we start to become aware of ourselves. We also know that our nervous system is designed so that we live in a self-enclosed system of our own stories. Mm-hmm. Our nervous system is self-referring. So to really be able to see ourselves, we have to be really attune our awareness. And what's immeasurably valuable is to get somebody that can be an observer too. Mm-hmm. A friend, a good friend, a coach, a guide, a mentor, a therapist that will say, you know, every time you bring up this situation, your eyes dart back and forth. And what I notice then is that it produces in me that you're in a state of anxiety. Mm-hmm. So we become self-aware. We enlist the help of someone or a team. And we do this with leadership teams where people can give each other assessments and saying, oh, positive assessments and constructive assessments. It looked like you're a little bit tense today. Why do you say that? Oh, because your brow is furrowed, your shoulders are up, and you don't make eye contact. Mm-hmm. That's not like a negative criticism. It's just helping the team to get up to speed and to be present, for example.
To learn to observe.
Learn to observe.
Yeah.
You become a self-observer, somebody helps reflects things back to you, and then you take on a practice that helps that shape have that coherence or congruence. Mm-hmm. And that brings me into, maybe for a moment I'll show, I think, relate the parable of the stone cutters. Mm-hmm. Many of you have probably heard this, but you imagine there's these three stone cutters, they're sitting on a stool. They have a big piece of granite in front of them, and they're hammering away at that piece of granite. And to the casual observer, they're all doing the same thing. But you go up to them and you ask the first person, you say, what are you doing? And she says, I'm cutting on a piece of granite. That's the person that is just doing the activity with very little intent, not a deep narrative. Just I'm doing this work to get it done.
I'm just doing my job, right?
Perfect. I'm just doing my job. I'm crossing these T's and dotting these I's all day, and people are happy with it. Right. The second person, you go to her and you say, what are you doing? And she says, I'm building a wall. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you realize that even in the same activity, that shifts her intent. That shifts the quality of her attention. That shifts her horizon of time. And in the way she's doing it, you can almost sense or feel the difference in that. You go to the third person and you ask her or him, what are you doing? And they say, I'm building a cathedral. Now, the parable wants to reveal that we're at our best when the activity that we're doing is connected to the strongest, most important narrative that we have.
Yeah.
What is
The
it?
why to our commitment.
Yes, the forsake of what
Yeah.
to our actions.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And so our work really brings those together. So in our leadership training, we go into in-depth conversations of what is important to you, what is it that matters to you, and to fulfill on that and manifest that, what do you have to do? What virtues do you have to strengthen? What networks you have to build? What practices you need to be in?
Mm-hmm. That's great. One of my interest has for a long time been language and embodiment. And one of the phrases you used that really caught my eye was that language is a bodily phenomena. And, you know, I get it, but I think it's really an area of talking about how our language and our stories shape us, and how we can extract ourselves from our stories and become a witness of them, so we become more of an author than a player in someone else's novel.
Yes, we say that the bodies that we are will be the lives that we lead. Mm-hmm. And the stories we tell ourselves will be the lives that we lead. The good news is both our bodies and our stories have a plasticity about them. In other words, as you said, we can change. We can actually produce different narratives, different stories for our life, and we can produce a different shape, a different bodily form in action that is congruent with that narrative. Mm. And there's places where you do something and you see somebody roll their eyes. That's a link that becomes a distinction in language for us. We go, oh, they're upset with what I did. Mm-hmm. Or you do something and then you can feel a smile breaks on their face. And that produces in us, I'm producing satisfaction or fulfillment here. Mm-hmm. So we're always, like I say, those big signboards that say, eat at Joe's restaurant. Used to see them downtown, big cities, and people would walk around with the address. That's kind of who we are, really.
Yeah, right.
We're always revealing our stories and our lives through our bodies.
Well, that really brings up, I was going to go another place, but that really brings up the subject of authenticity, going back to the congruency thing, because while it is written on us and people can sense and feel that, there's such a tendency, and especially in organizations, I used to call it the veil of familiarity, because I brought 5 Rhythms work years ago and tried to bring it into corporations. It was a hard sell at that time. I think there's more opening now. But in the workplace and organizations, we get smaller and smaller in our conversations and are often left with gossip, complaints, negative feedback, that kind of thing, which continues to shrink us down and then create separation and allies. So where does the body come in this, so that we can go back to taking a risk to have the kinds of conversations that are authentic and real, that actually you don't have it all together all the time, that inspire people because you are human, you don't have it together, but you figure it out in a way that actually is inspiring through communicating authentically.
I really like, Michael, what you said about the conversation. The conversations make it smaller and smaller. That's my observation too, that they become narrower and narrower, and then what gets lost is this whole abundance of emotions and moods and possibility for invention that we have. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you, one of the practices that we have, and it gets initiated as an ongoing practice in leadership teams or leadership culture. At the beginning of every meeting, and people are constantly in meetings, everybody stands and they do a centering practice.
Mm-hmm.
And one person might lead and say, pay attention to your vertical line and relax your eyes, relax your breath. And they may lead the whole piece, or each person, we teach how each person can say one thing. Bring your attention to your back and settle back into yourself. Feel your history, for example. Another person may say, let's all take 3 deep breaths together and let that breath out. So all of a sudden, the conversation, just because of doing that, begins to widen out, because they go, oh God, I have been holding all this tension in my shoulders, or I've been holding my breath, or I've been squeezing my sit bones in a way that I can't feel my legs anymore. And now I can start to feel this move through me. From there, we'll have everyone go around and give a very short mood check. And some people can say, I'm committed, I feel grateful. And we also open it up to somebody say, I'm despondent today, or I feel a little bit resigned today, to really authenticate or legitimatize those are human emotions and moods. And we can bring them to the conversation. And in fact, by noticing them and how they live in us, in our bodies, they're just not thoughts. They actually live in our tissues, as I explained before, as certain shapes, is that by then bringing them out, we can notice them, then we have the choice of whether to shift them or not.
Yeah, people often will say, or I've heard people say, well, I feel like shit today. And they're afraid that if they say something like that, that it'll make it more solid. But in fact, just the opposite happens. When you really are authentic about where you are, I'm angry, or I'm upset, or, I'm confused, whatever, just the acknowledging it in a circle of people will, it kind of dissolves it.
Definitely has the potential of dissolving it. The other practice that we have, if somebody is, maybe they had something going on at home, plus maybe a workload that's too much, and they come in and they say, I'm resentful or I'm resigned, is the other practice we have is that somebody can say to them, what do you need right now? So first of all, they can say it, and like you say, it gets released. They can say, maybe there's a change here. And then they realize they're not seen as being
flawed,
or something wrong with them. But just basically, this is where the moment we can all identify with it. And there's a team that has your back around it and can say, what do you need right now? And they may just say, you know what? Let me take a walk around the block, get some fresh air. I'll be back. I'll be back in 3 minutes. And we keep legitimatizing all of those kinds of action for people, for well-coordinated teams and well-coordinated people, and also people that are fulfilled at the workplace.
Yeah. Another area, Richard, I was just thinking as you were saying that is, again, tying in language and the body, is around feedback. So many CEOs and senior leadership people have told me over the years, they just don't tell me anything. They never tell me anything. And, the whole area of feedback, being able to receive feedback is a very bodily thing, I think, and being able to give it. Can you talk about the area, I know you do in your book, about feedback and giving and receiving it from an embodied presence?
Yes. We begin by saying one of the great mischiefs that can happen, and one of the great flaws, structural flaws that happen, is that people won't assess up or feedback up.
Right.
And so, like you say, often people who are at that level, if they're working in that kind of hierarchy, those people feel isolated, they feel not seen, and they don't get the feedback that's really needed. So we develop a culture in which we can say, we can assess down, and we can assess across, and we can assess up. And we take a lot of time here, because we say it's a real skill to be able to deliver a strong feedback to somebody that produces new action. So often people take feedback as, here's the feedback, I don't like this, or I like this, or you could do this better, but they don't finish it with a request. So we say each assessment, a powerful assessment, is both grounded and it's followed by a request. Now, to do that, one has to be centered, one has to be authentic in it, one has to produce in their shape the listening by the other that, oh, this person is committed to me and cares about me. The other thing is, what we found is very few people will go around and say to somebody else, give me some feedback about how I'm doing. Or can you give me an assessment about how I'm doing in this project? Most people run from that or hide from that. We claim the more that you ask your internal customer, your associate, your partner in that, how am I doing, that not only builds trust, is that as you're going through that rhythm of action to complete that, is that you know where you're at with it. Mm-hmm. You know you're on track or where you're not on track. Yeah. So we take plenty of time to do this. And, you know, we say you have to give the assessment when you're in the right mood. If you're really angry and give the assessment, what gets listened to is the anger. Yeah. So make sure you're centered first. If you get an assessment or a feedback that's difficult for you and you go, oh, it throws me off center, take a moment to come back to center and thank the person for the assessment. Ask for what their grounding is. Ask for what the request for the next action is. Let me give you a short example like that. There's a 9 o'clock meeting. Robert, for the last 3 meetings, has been coming in at 9:15. Finally, somebody says to him, I have an assessment here, Robert. Yeah. My assessment is you're not competent at keeping your commitment about time for this meeting. Robert goes, well, what do you mean? And he goes, the last 3 meetings, here's the grounding. You haven't come in until 9:15, Greenwich Mean Time. The other group will confirm that. My request is that you come in on time from this moment on. The other thing is that in making this assessment, this person says, so when you do that, basically trust is broken because you promised to do that. Now I don't trust that you're going to keep your promise about being here on time. Robert says, I'll make the commitment. I make the commitment to being on time. Next 4 meetings, he's there at 5 minutes to 9. He goes to this person and he says, have I changed your assessment? And the other person says, yes, I see that you changed your assessment. You're executing on this commitment, and thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. You know, there's kind of a conspiracy in most organizations. I think the larger the organization, the more it is. And it's around, I won't call you on your stuff if you don't call me on mine. And inside of that, again, it's that shrinkage that we talked about a minute ago. Inside of that is something that you mentioned that I love, that David White talks often about, is having a courageous conversation. And you talk about it from an embodied sense. There are times when we have to have really difficult conversations with people. And I think it brings up all of our shame or our doubt or our self-consciousness, whatever, that we have to really step up to the plate to have a real courageous conversation. That what your example is a little courageous conversation, but I mean some of the real courageous conversations we have to have. Can you talk about that whole concept?
Yeah, and I will start, Michael, with, you know, in my experience in the martial arts, what I found, and other boxers will say this, and people who are competing, but especially in boxing, is that around the 2nd or 3rd round, there will often, not always, there will often be an implicit agreement that people will start hitting each other harder, and they'll make an implicit agreement of, I won't hit you that hard if you don't hit me that hard. Yeah. Just like you said. Yeah. Yeah. So there's something inside of us is deep around that. Like, I want to get along. I want to also increase my value. And I have to be careful that if I go too far, I might be crushed, or I might crush you. Mm-hmm. And what it does is that, again, it narrows down the conversations that we have. It narrows them down. And then basically we start to circle the bowl, and we move towards less and less potential. To have these courageous conversations are difficult. And what we have people come to terms with is the authenticity and the knowledge that, oh yes, this is difficult, and that's where I'm going to start. So you can say to the other person, I want to have this conversation with you, and this is difficult for me. I'm finding my way through it. I want you to listen to it in the spirit of my commitment to you. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, they own the notion that I'm just not going to fire full volley at you. I'm not going to be careful with you. I'm going to speak directly to you. And we don't do this often. I don't have competency. I want to consider it a conversation, but let's move forward with it. Mm-hmm. Well, as I say that now, that's easy to say. But in other words, it's also training the body, because they're looking 93% at your body and how you are in that. Yeah. And so that you come with it in a very centered, grounded, open place. For the listener, we build the culture in which we go, oh, here's somebody that's denoting this is the difficult conversation. What do I first have to do? I have to center myself. In other words, all of a sudden I'm going, what did I do wrong? I feel really guilty. I feel defensive. I disassociate, and I go, I'm going to come back to this moment, and I'm listening. I will grant them that they're taking in the spirit of our commitment together. Again, I say that, and it's easy to say that, but it also, we practice so it becomes a bodily felt sense. So both the nervous system, the muscular system, the organ system are all attending to that in that moment. Yeah. And that person can say, listen, give me a moment. I'm a little bit triggered here because I don't know what's coming. I automatically fall into guilt. I won't be there and I'll be present, but let me just center. We often say to people, let's center together. Mm-hmm. I'll give you another example. We, as part of our practice, we hand out people a jo. Jo means staff in Japanese. Mm-hmm. And we show them a sequence of moves with the jo. It's called a kata. Then we show them moves they can do with with each other, 2 people, 3 people, even a whole team of 12 can coordinate together with the jo. And at some point, we were working with this team down here in Silicon Valley. And the HR person said, if 2 people are arguing, the first thing I want you to do is to work, and you can't really speak to each other, do the jo practice together. Mm-hmm. And then if you can't talk, after that, if you can't talk to each other, come to me. Mm. And what he found out was that after 75% of people moving together in this way, things got settled and they could have the courageous conversation. Mm. Which I thought was extraordinary. And I thought it was extraordinary is that's what he said to them.
Yeah, really good. I can't believe we're close to the end of our time already and so much more to talk about. But one thing I would really be remiss if I didn't is about commitment, is about an embodied commitment, an embodied stand. People really cheapen talk by saying things that they don't end up doing. And there's a whole area of how do we reclaim that. But let's start with how do we embody a stand, a commitment that we really take on, and it is in our body, and it isn't something that's a throwaway statement like, oh, I'll see you soon. You know, the way we talk, so much of our language is really sloppy around that. Can you address that area, Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. We have a very strong model of a commitment-based management and a commitment-based leadership, mm-hmm. so that when we move things forward by making commitments. And commitments are always made in time. So just when you said that, please, like, be really nice to see you, is that we listen, is that a commitment to do that? And you can ask that person, is that a request or is that an offer? Because that's how we begin action, by making requests or offers or declarations. Right. If they say it is, we say what is always involved in a commitment is time. When do you want to do that? Yeah. And all of a sudden it starts to become very granular and very pragmatic and very grounded, where at that moment the person, we go, oh, we're actually creating a future together. So we have practices around making promises, making declines. You can make counter offers. You may commit to commit. You make declarations about the future. And we practice those so that they became an embodied speaking. And then when you speak that way, like you say, it's just not breath going through the vocal cords. You're listening to the body and you're going, oh, this person is serious about this. And actually through these commitments, building a stronger relationship with me. Yeah. The other thing I want to say, because I know we're running out of time, and this is important, is you said taking a stand. And one of the things that we've seen is that people are not skillful in leadership around fighting for something. That's very different than fighting against something. So either people will go red very quickly, high volume, blow everybody away. Or everybody will go, gee, I'm afraid of having that courageous conversation, of making that move, of taking the stand, and then they become, they shrink or they atrophy. So we do practices from a centered position where they say, I am a stand for, or I am a commitment to. And the background to that are conversations about what do you care about? Why do you care about it? What do you need in that? Et cetera, et cetera. And then we'll do certain practices from the martial arts where you get to hit a pad and say, I'm a stand for environmental sustainability. I'm a stand for gender equity in our company. And then being able to take the powerful moves from a centered place that becomes part of who they are back at the office.
Yeah, I love that. What it does is it really takes us back to our why. And, people throw things out, but they're really not, like you said, say an environmental commitment in my company or something like that. But then you have to make a decision about, well, that means that we either charge more or cut down on the amount of perfection that we put in something, that kind of thing. And the why, if people really lived inside of that and had it in their body, we'd have a whole different kind of world.
Yes, absolutely. And as we say, live it in our body, live it in our living expression of life.
Yeah.
You see people actually taking those actions and taking the risk. Yeah.
Well, Richard, it's just been a joy to be with you. I want to plug your book again, The Leadership Dojo, Build Your Foundation as an Exemplary Leader. And again, I want to say that this is not just for in business, this is for in your life, whether it's taking care of your house, your children, or just getting through your daily routines. These things that Richard's teaching are really powerful for living a life you love, a committed life, a life of joy, and really full, authentic self-expression. So Richard, just a joy to be with you again, and I look forward to another opportunity sometime soon.
Thanks, Michael. Good being with you again as well.
Yeah.